welcome back. It is review morgue time, and we are going to delve into one of, well, not my favorite, well, actually one of my least favorites of Edgar Allan Poe's stories, but we'll discuss that when we discuss the movie. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of the background behind the movie, as you can see from behind Carmen's head, the wonderful, movie poster. Two of the main characters are two of the most iconic in the world of Universal monsters.
Yes.
So, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So, Carmen, take it away.
All right. So the Black Cat, 1934. So just 3 years after Dracula and Frankenstein were set on the screen to begin the, I think, lifetime of horror and introduction of horror, kind of like that really created a craze, I think. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so obviously Boris Karloff was one of the main people in this movie, and he played an architect. His name was Halmer Holzig, and Bela Lugosi was a psychiatrist, and his name was Dr. Vitas Vertigast. And they kind of had a, I would say, love-hate relationship because part of the story we're going to talk about here in just a minute why they did not necessarily like each other. But then you had two other supporting actors. I'm sorry, David Manners played Peter Allison, and he was a mystery writer in the story. That doesn't really kind of play a part until later in the film. And then another actress, or the main actress, was Julie Bishop, who played Joan Allison, his wife, and they were on their honeymoon, and things go horribly wrong. And so again,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to talk about the movie later. But what's a very interesting little connection for David Manners to Bela Lugosi, Manners played John Harker in the movie Dracula. So I thought that was kind of a neat little thing that they brought them back together. And then the most known other movie that Julie Bishop made was The Sands of Iwo Jima way later with John Wayne. But she was a child actress known under two other names that I didn't really look up. But so she and Manners had really been around in the silent film era as well. But the director was Edgar G. Ulmer. So I thought that was kind of cool that his name was Edgar. And he took some license with a lot of the film and some other things that were not the norm for 1934 in film. He basically decided to create a film where music of some type of score was playing throughout the entire movie in the background. Normally, at that point, music was at the beginning to introduce the movie and at the end with credits. And Jeanie, like, do you remember any other ones around that time that did that same thing? Or do you think this was the first?
As far as I know, I think it was the first because once I heard the rendition of, I believe it was Beethoven, right?
Oh,
Was that
it
the
was Bach,
Bach?
are you talking about the toccata and fugue in D minor?
There we go. The
Yeah,
Tocata
Bach.
and
Yeah.
Fugue in D minor. It was Bach's, but
Yeah.
that was, this I think was the movie that made that the staple for horror. That iconic score
Hmm.
became, you know, you can't hear it without automatically thinking of horror movies.
Oh my gosh.
And
They used it, so many directors use that in
Mhm.
their films. It wasn't, it was crazy in a good way.
but but the thing about it is, I think this is the only movie that I remember that they used almost like the first full score of it, because usually they only use like a few intro
Yeah.
parts of it. They don't use like a full score, but they had it where it was playing because I remember going, "Oh my God, this is like the staple for horror." And
Yeah.
now we know where it came from and where it started,
Oh yeah. I agree.
So,
I thought it was really cool, but I looked up the soundtrack for this film, after hearing that, because it
mhm.
just as soon as like there's a scene in the movie that where Karloff is playing the organ and that's the actual song that's playing, and
Yeah.
it makes you stand at attention because it's that da-na-na, 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 and then it goes on and on. That was probably bad, but that's okay. But
Well, and also many people don't realize that the early 30s was not that far away from when silent movies ended.
very
You
true.
know,
Yes.
because you have to
Yeah.
remember that the early 30s was also the Great Depression,
Hmm.
in the stock market crash of 1929,
Yep.
where a lot of people, lost everything. Movies kind of, good thing was is if we think about it today, if that would happen, a lot of the popular TV, or not TV, but movie people wouldn't be able to create and would go under and bankrupt. So it was very, very weird that Universal Pictures was able to hang on to that and
Yeah.
continue, because think about all the actors and actresses, and they weren't getting paid a lot anyway.
Yeah. That
So you
is
can
true.
imagine they're not getting paid a lot now. And that's why a lot of them kept getting reused, because there
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of people out there to do their jobs. So,
Absolutely. And people needed that escapism from
mhm,
reality, even if it was horror, to,
yeah,
make them, at least not have to think about what was going on in the world.
yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what film was created for,
Hmm.
was for the, I don't want to say it in a derogatory term, but it was created more for the illiterate or less learned,
Hmm.
because books, for example, books were, a staple in the libraries, but not a lot of people went to the libraries, and nobody could afford uh, newspapers, much less books,
Yeah,
in
that's
those
very
days.
true.
So
Yeah,
this
that
was
is very
this was
true.
a way they could get into and just sit down and, like you said, escape from their reality.
Hmm. Kind of going back to the music aspect too, they used a ton of symphonies and from Franz Liszt's, and I'm not sure if I am actually saying that properly. Robert Schumann. Let's see who else, and Tchaikovsky, which was really kind of
Mhm.
during part of the background music for the honeymooners. It was the Romeo and Juliet overture, so I thought that was really a neat thing. And I've heard that actually, I can't remember what film it was, but it was around that same time that music was used before at the beginning and the end. It actually may have been Dracula, because I think Dracula originally did not have music added, and then people have added it back in later, just at the beginning and the end. And
Well, and once more, those types of classical scores were perfect for these movies,
yes,
because they were created just as instrumentals. There's
yeah,
no, singing, there's no lyrics. It's all about where the music does the talking.
yes, and sets the tone, sets the scene and the
Mhm.
ambiance. Two other, we mentioned Bach, and then Franz Schubert, and also Brahms,
Mhm.
and Beethoven. And so, a lot of the big named musicians and creators of some of the greatest symphonies that have ever been.
Yeah, and the thing that we could think about too is during this early 1930s, they weren't that old. They hadn't
No,
been dead that long.
no.
They were still, that was the iconic era, because even the 1920s started the big band kind of thing when you started coming in. You had jazz that was taken because of prohibition and all
Right.
that kind of stuff, and the blues. But even still, they were very juvenile or in their infancy,
Yeah.
whereas classical music was the big one that took over everything.
I agree. And I think one of the best things about this film was the music that was
Mhm.
added in the background and the appropriateness to set the tone for each of the scenes and what Ulmer chose to go in there. That part of what we're gonna, talking about this film, it was the best. It really, he did an amazing job.
Yeah, and from my point of view, I think it was also a filler because there
Yeah,
was not a lot of dialogue. The
that's true.
dialogue was very, how should I say this? Sparing.
Yes.
I mean, there was a
Yeah.
lot of the intense looks. It was like watching the body language more than listening to the words.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yes.
Because Karloff and Lugosi are, iconic for their body language,
Hmm.
not only just for their voices, because like we were talking earlier, I can just play a movie without looking at it and I can hear their voices.
Yeah.
I know exactly who they are.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I honestly think that if I had just closed my eyes, I could have pictured in my head where they were, what it looked like throughout the whole movie based on how they were describing things and the music
Mhm.
setting the tone.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things with them being one of the staple artists of the time because
Hmm.
they were being reused and reused because, like we said, they were there, they were probably already known, and people needed to get some semblance of an audience. And so what better way to get the audience than to reuse people that, it'd be like in today's world.
Hmm.
Captain America, you can't think of Captain America without thinking of Chris Evans.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
So can't think of Dracula without thinking of Lugosi and
Mhm.
Karloff and Frankenstein and Wolfman and all those cool ones.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
so yeah.
absolutely.
But
Well,
yeah, let's talk about the movie.
yeah, well, and the British title was called The House of Doom because there was really not as much of a Poe connection in Great Britain. And so they felt like, based on, and again, we're about to talk about the movie, why that House of Doom makes perfect sense. One other thing was that this was the first of 8 movies that Karloff and Lugosi would pair up and work together. So this
Mhm.
kind of set the stage for them working together for that many more movies, which is really, really cool.
The
And
only one missing from that would make a perfect trifecta of that would been Vincent Price.
oh yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, absolutely. And like Lon Chaney because he was the Wolf Man.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of more on the horror staples. I mean, Lon Chaney
Okay, yeah.
definitely, but
Mm.
if you think about the voices and the voices that tie to horror, you
Yes, yes,
cannot think of it without thinking of the trifecta of Karloff, Lugosi, and Price.
yes. And
They were what made horror in film.
yeah, definitely their voices. And luckily enough, Vincent Price did get to work with Karloff later on.
Yeah, but
With
it
performance.
wouldn't have been it would have just been perfect to get all three of them together.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I wish they could have all three been in a movie together. That would have been just I seriously could have closed my eyes for that.
Mhm. Yeah,
That
I could have watched the whole movie behind my eyelids.
yeah. And this was Universal Pictures' biggest hit of 1934.
Yeah, and I can understand why.
Yeah, absolutely. You got star power, you've got Poe's name, and you've got it is a very interesting story. The movie was well done, and again, we're about to go into all the details. But the one thing that I want to bring up first is this story, The Black Cat. It does have a black cat in it. It's called The Black Cat, but it is Poe in name only.
Absolutely. I think that's why in the very beginning, when they start rolling the credits, it
Mhm.
says Immortal Edgar Allan.
Yes. Yes.
I'm like, well, they gave him credit for the name of the movie, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and it pretty much what I read was that Ulmer I mean, to me, if you had Karloff and you had Lugosi, that's really all you needed to advertise this film. But
Mhm.
he felt like to draw more people in, he needed Poe's name, and that's why he did it. And that was smart.
Well, and also, if you think about it, I don't really remember, other than Bram Stoker,
Hmm.
there being another writer and Agatha Christie that would be such a draw to a movie crowd. Because think about it, you
Yeah.
have Murder on the Orient Express,
Hmm.
which I don't think the first movie of that came out, I think in the 60s, maybe 50s, 60s.
I think there is a 70s version. There may be an earlier version. I know, and then there were none has, I believe, a 1940s version because I've
Yeah, I
seen
knew there
that.
was I
Yeah.
knew there was one that she had that was probably in that
Yeah.
area of the
Hmm.
40s, but I couldn't remember which one it was.
Yeah. It's
And
in
then,
there
of
were none.
course, Dracula with Bram Stoker, because
Right.
that's the horror.
Yeah.
Then you've got, of course, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Hmm.
But those were just the iconic uh,
Yeah.
particulars of one story.
Yeah.
So to me, Edgar Allan Poe is the only one that I've seen that has multiple adaptations or pulls for his name put into the movies, whether
Yeah.
they were silent films or whether they were the new movie version with audio and video.
I think you're right. And even thinking about non-horror films, thinking
Hmm.
about, some of the big authors of that time frame and like late 1800s or even, just whole 19th century, you don't even think about the author for some of like the romance movies, the dramas. It's really more about the movie, who's in it, and the storyline. And
Yeah.
so at horror, you really look at who wrote it, who wrote the story.
Well, and even if we just take away the genre, I
Hmm.
mean, think about all of them. I mean, even Shakespeare did not have that many that was being put in film. He
Right.
was probably, a lot of it was sticking to stage. Then
Hmm.
you got H.G. Wells, you've got
Yeah.
George, Orwell. Sorry, couldn't remember his last name.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And
Oh, Jules Verne too.
one,
Yeah.
yeah, Jules Verne. But even then, like you said, it wasn't their name or their, stories that was drawing the crowds.
Hmm.
It was just they were the ones that wrote the stories that they adapted to
Yeah.
for the movies. Whereas, like we're going about to talk about with this movie, the only thing that is attached to Edgar Allan Poe is like the name on the bulletin behind you and the black cat. That's
Yeah.
it.
Black cat. And I have my little, I don't know if you can kind of see him, but
No, bring him
it's,
closer.
yeah, it's creepy.
Just
I
look
don't have
there.
this thing.
Ah, okay. But yeah. So, but I would do want to say one thing about the movie that I thought was being interesting. When you watch this, anybody
Yeah.
that watches this movie, when the black cat first shows up in the movie,
Hmm.
if you have ever watched The Matrix, it is like the exact scene of the black cat.
Oh, that's interesting, Jeannie.
Um, You know, when they do the black cat in the movie where it has that glitch kind of
Yeah.
thing,
Yes,
you
yes.
will watch in this movie and then go back and watch that part of the Matrix. It is like identical to when the black cat walks in and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So
That's
I
a
thought that was
really
rather
cool
good.
thing that you picked up on. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, that's
So I'm
really
like, well, you know, they got to pay homage to some of the good stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is the black cat belongs to Polzig, who is played by Karloff, and
Hmm.
Bela Lugosi's character, I always have to look at the spelling. It's Vertigast. It's spelled with a
But
W
yeah,
because
yeah.
of the German kind of take on it. But
Hmm.
and they call each other their first names, Vetus and Yalmer. But
Yeah.
um, but Vetus, Bela Lugosi, is deathly afraid of cats. And we looked up what the phobia of the fear of cats is, and it is ailurophobia, Ailurophobia. So I thought that
Yeah,
was
but very specifically in the movie, uh, Yelmer makes a point of saying that Lugosi's character, Vertigo, is very afraid of black cats. He's
yeah,
deathly afraid of black cats. So he specifically says black cats, not all cats.
yeah.
So I thought that was rather, poignant too, that they
I,
were pointing out.
I think that's kind of going to paying homage to Poe with his story as well.
Yeah. And the one thing is with the writing and the creation of this story,
Mhm.
it keeps very well with the time period. They do bring in what is going on in the world.
Yep.
They tie it to the World War I,
Yes. Hmm.
especially Karloff's character, that he and Yarmer were together because Yarmer was his commanding officer
Hmm.
during the war.
Yeah. Well, now Bela Lugosi is the one that he's Vetus, and Karloff,
Yeah,
yeah, is Yalmer.
yeah, and Yarmer was the his boss.
Yeah.
That's the one. He's the architect that created the building that built
Right.
over the giant graveyard.
Yes.
So Lugosi's character was the one that ended up going to prison at the end of
Mhm.
the war for the last 15 years, or
Yes.
18, 15, 18. I can't remember. I think he said he was there for 15 years.
I think you're right. Yeah. I think it was
So,
15 years. Yeah.
yeah. So that's how he ends up on the train with the Collins couple.
Hmm.
And so they end up sharing a little cabin together on the train. And this is what I thought was also ironic is when they were checking the tickets for the Collinses,
Hmm.
that they were on their way to Budapest for the Orient Express.
Yes. I thought that was really cool too. Yeah.
So I thought, ooh, so we're going to talk about Agatha Christie too. All
Well,
right.
and
Then,
with Peter Allison being a mystery writer on top of
mhm.
that, it was just all kind of really nicely packaged.
Yeah, but what was really iconic is they don't introduce what Collins actually does until like 20, 30 minutes into the film.
Yeah, you mean Allison. Allison, they were the Allisons.
Whatever. What
Okay.
did I call him?
Collins.
Was that his?
Yeah, he is Peter Allison and his wife is Joan. Now, they don't actually say her first name probably
Yeah,
until like 30-ish minutes into the film.
yeah. They kept
They do
calling her
give it
Miss
some.
Allison.
Yeah.
I don't know why I called him Collins. I guess I keep thinking of Tom Collins, the drink. I don't know why.
Okay.
But anyway,
Good. It's all
Collins.
good. It's
Uh,
good.
yeah. But I thought, it's kind of. I mean, one thing I will say about this movie that keeps with Edgar Allan Poe's story is it is creepy as hell.
Yes. Basically one of the other things I read that Universal Pictures asked Ulmer to do was to take out some of the violence in it, and instead he added more. That
Yeah.
and it's to and you can for that time period, it was very I could only imagine living in that time period and what going to see this movie. I would have probably been very disturbed.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the thing about it, the one thing that we've always talked about, well, I don't think we've talked about it on our episodes, but we've
Mhm.
talked about it together, is that a lot of the movies, the TV shows and stuff like that in the early days, they didn't show blood. You
No.
know, they
Mm,
would show some wounds and stuff, but they wouldn't show blood, which
right.
I thought was very interesting in this movie
Hmm.
because one of the violent scenes, and this is another thing, is that people keep popping up with guns. They just pull guns out of their pockets, and I'm going, where'd that come from?
I know.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the surprise, the surprise gun just comes out of nowhere. But one of the servant of Lugosi's
Hmm.
gets shot, and
Yes.
you actually see that looks like blood on the back of his jacket when
Yes.
he gets up. So
Hmm.
that's very unusual. And I think what was also unusual about it, he was only shot once, but there were two bullet holes on the back of his jacket with blood on them.
Yes.
I thought
Yeah.
that was, I was
Yeah.
like, wow,
I
okay, it traveled. Okay.
yeah,
Uh,
I kind of I thought that was interesting as well. And there's one scene that once because there's an accident that happens, and Lugosi and the Allisons are traveling by carriage to the house, and the house of doom, I guess you could say,
mhm,
Elmer's house, and they get in an accident, and Lugosi's servant has to help them get up to the house. And once they get kind of settled in, and Vetus takes care of Joan because she got hurt, then the black cat appears for the first time when the fear of cats is talked about by Yalmer. There's a very disturbing scene after that, and I don't know, Jeannie, if we want to give the spoiler alert on this,
no,
but
I don't think
it
we need to give a lot of it away. So,
not some of it is reminiscent of Poe's The Black Cat, but
mhm.
not not the exact same way. But we don't want to give too many spoilers for that. But
Yeah,
it
it's
was
not
surprising.
identical to the story, but
Yeah,
it does pay homage with the creation of the scene.
yeah, I agree.
So
Yeah,
it, I mean, Lugosi and Karloff are excellent body language actors, and like we were discussing, there is not a lot of dialogue in this movie.
yeah.
And there's some points where you're sitting there going, are they going to do is just stare at each other? I mean, it's like, I mean, sure, you're building the suspense with the music and them staring at each other, but it's like it gives you new meaning to the words if looks could kill.
Yes. And even looking at the poster, looking at the way their eyes are cutting to
Mhm.
each other, that was very well done for the
Yeah,
poster.
yeah.
And
It's
um
very
but
reminiscent with the cat in the middle going, ah, okay.
I know. But Lugosi's character Vetus, he is very upset with Yalmer, but Yalmer doesn't they again, it's love-hate relationship. They work
Mhm.
together in the war, and pretty much Vetus is coming back for revenge. And as we know, that is a theme that runs through many Poe stories. And so again, I think that's a little bit of an homage to Poe.
And also there is the female aspect that not only just with Mrs. Collins there, but
Yeah.
one of the whole
Allison.
reasons that
Allison.
I swear they changed their name to Collins. I'm sorry. I don't know why. It's like, I guess because Joan Collins and Tom Collins. I just
That's
don't
so
know.
funny.
That is
Oh,
weird.
it's
Allison,
funny.
Allison. It's like I got a block with the name Allison. But
I
anyway,
know. I know. Anyway, just Joan and Peter.
Vetus,
Joan and Peter.
yeah, the Vetus, there's the female, like I was saying, the female aspect that ties into Poe is that Vetus, one of the things is he's looking for his wife and his daughter.
Yes.
And he knows that Yammer has to know where she's at because Yammer went to America and told her that uh, Lugosi's characters was dead, that he had
Exactly.
died in prison.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why he shows up because he's come to reclaim his wife.
Yes. And daughter, hopefully, because
Yeah.
he's at this point, he doesn't know whether they made it or not.
Yes. And so this is where he finds out that uh, they're dead, apparently,
Hmm.
according to Karloff's character. They're both dead.
Hmm.
But we well know that, especially in Poe's stories, that the females have a tendency to show up somewhere in there. And so in this movie, they do show up, and it's very creepy how they show up.
It is so Poe-esque. It is so
Yeah.
Poe-esque.
But
I
I will
I
say
don't even
this.
want to give it away for the spoiler alert because it
No.
it takes you back a minute when they show it.
Yeah, and it really is, it's not really just taken aback. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
You know that this is something that is prominent, but you didn't realize that it was something they talked about in the movies
Yeah.
because they do discuss other things in other movies and everything, but this one will take you going, oh,
It
okay.
really, you think you know what's going to happen, and then
Mhm.
the next scene will come along and it is so different than what you think it's going to be.
Well, one thing I did notice is that in one of the scenes that Karloff, they were, you know, Mrs. Allison ends up being, I'll give this part away.
Yeah.
She's being obsessed over by all the men in the movie, basically.
Yes. Yes.
And one of the reasons they like to obsess is because, sacrificial lambs, and she's like the perfect sacrifice.
Hmm.
But one of the things in the movies is like right before the sacrifice, did you notice that the scene was almost reminiscent of Lugosi's in uh, the Rue Morgue when the at the
Yes, it was.
yes, yes,
Yes,
the way
definitely
they had it
was.
set up and
Yes.
what props they were using, it
Hmm.
was like, oh, this is like when they did Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Yeah.
Only
And
they flip flopped it. It's Karloff instead of Lugosi being the
right.
crazy person this time.
Yeah, totally. And the other part of that too, with the women, to me, reminded me of the brides of Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
Well, just the way they were dressed, the way they were acting, and going, along with that scene.
Yeah, and then as we were discussing, some of the instances with the hair dressing and stuff, that was reminiscent of Frankenstein's wife.
Yes, or yeah, the monster's, yeah, wife,
Yeah,
however you want to say it, the bride of
yeah,
Frankenstein.
the
Yeah.
monster Frankenstein, whatever.
Yes,
Not
there's
Dr. Frankenstein, but
yes,
whatever,
they have the same hairdresser.
Exactly. Like, oh, well, they use probably the same hairdresser in every movie. So, and
Yes.
I, wow, how much hairspray did we use for that scene?
Oh yeah.
Um,
But and we totally can give away, because we've mentioned that, with there was a possible sacrifice that happens,
mhm,
that Karloff, Yalmer's character, Yalmer was a like satanic priest, and that's actually in the synopsis of the movie, and tells that he's wanting to make a sacrifice. And
mhm.
they don't go a lot in depth for that, and so I think that could have been like given more information about that. But because I felt like it didn't take away from the movie, but it helped to have Vetus's character trying to save her.
Yeah. And one of the things I think maybe they kind of held off on that was tying the Satanism to the
Yeah.
World War One pie.
Yeah.
So
That's very possible. Yeah.
they were using a lot of the crossovers about Austria and Germany and things that they both were in the war. And Yanmer's character, Vita, was very much accusatory of him being the reason that a lot of the men died.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
he was the traitor, and so that's, I think,
Hmm.
with the Satanism aspect of it, along with the World War One and all that other kind of stuff, it did have a very political vibe.
Yes, the undertones, definitely.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but I think they may have held back a little bit on the storyline, not to be too in your face with it.
Yeah, I think so too. And one of the when toward the end, when all the things were, coming to a head, and kind of the basically it was actually right before the ending, when Vetus was down, in the basement area, where that's where Vetus and Yalmer worked together in that building, and
Mhm.
that was where that he was held prisoner. He knew like where all the things were, and all the, I guess, torture type things. And so, because I know, like, Jeff and I watched this together, and he goes, how does he know, where this is at? I'm like, he was there working with Yalmer before. And so that was kind of a very interesting thing, that he was able to maneuver himself through the basement area trying to save her.
Yeah, but it was also one of the battlements. It was the
Yeah.
place of one of the battlements, and they had, it was sitting on a load of dynamite,
Yes.
and that was their job during the war when they were fighting as soldiers at that battlement,
Hmm.
was to try to protect it
Yeah.
and use it for, they had places for the guns, for the snipers and all the, that kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
so that's why he knew where all that stuff was until, they got like I think it was 10 or 15,000 of them died at that particular spot because
Yeah.
the Germans took it over.
Yes. Hmm.
And then Yalmer, being an architect, bought it and rebuilt his home on it,
Right. Yeah.
which that was another thing that, Vita does not like. So I don't blame him.
Yeah. Oh, I know. And it was very interesting, because you kind of expected that this was not the first time I had seen the movie, rewatching it again for us to have our discussion. The first time I watched it, and then, like, when Jeff and I rewatched it, he made the same comment. You expect this spooky old mansion type feel and vibe, and you walk in, the house from the outside in, it's very Art Deco, which 1934 makes total sense. And it was just very interesting how it was not so spooky, except for the shadows that were played around with.
Yeah, it was very Frank Lloyd Wrightish
Yes, yes.
because of the modernization with the doors and
Hmm.
how the everything had such a clean, precise, you
Yes.
know, feel to it.
Yeah, it totally did. It was just, it was one of those things that again, you don't expect. You think it's going to be just thinking about Poe, thinking about the 19th century, and just creepiness. And yes, it was creepy, but in a very different way.
Yeah, and it also paid homage to what you see on the outside versus what's lurking underneath.
Yes.
Because when
Yeah.
in the movie, when they start utilizing the basement area and taking people into the basement, that's
Hmm.
where you get the creep factor,
Yes. Oh, yeah.
because that is where it's like the skeletons in the closet type attitude, which is
Exactly.
kind of ironic because he had all these dead bodies in the basement. So
Oh, yeah.
It had a serial killer vibe to it. So
Oh, I know. It kind of reminded me, not totally, but just kind of referencing, but like House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price, just
mhm.
thinking about what was beneath, down in the basement and just all the creepiness down there. It was the same kind of thing.
I will say it didn't really it didn't really draw my attention to following it for the fact of figuring the story out.
Mm-hmm.
It mostly just kept me interested to see what in the world they were going to do next.
Yeah.
Because it was one of those things where it's like, huh? Huh? What? That? No, okay, whatever. Like, okay. But I did at the very end, I'm not going to give away the very ending part because
Oh,
I want
yeah.
people
We
to
shouldn't do that. Yeah.
get that themselves. But the one part of where Allison, I remembered his name this time, Mr. Allison being a mystery writer,
Yes.
I thought the very end was definitely a major shout out to Poe
Yes.
because of him
Yes.
being a literary critic and some of the critiques that he got as a writer.
I totally agree. That was the ending is a really cool ending, and
Mhm.
it's not what you expect,
No.
because there's doom and gloom, and then there's the one last scene that you kind of don't
Mhm.
expect. Like I could even see some people thinking, what happens at the end, and then it's like, oh, it's done, but then they span to or pan to the train. I'll just say that. And yeah, very, very interesting. But yes, definitely a nod to Poe.
But I also think one of the weird things is like, remember when we talked about the murders in the Rue Morgue, how everything is very English until one particular scene is French.
Yes.
And this has kind of got the same aspect because it's like everything, they're not in England, they're in Europe, they're in near Budapest, and they're more Germanic and French
Mm-hmm.
because they have a gendarme and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then it's like everything that they read is not French, it is English.
Yeah.
So it's like, how does Allison, even though he's an author, how can he read all these different languages? Does
Oh,
he
I
just
know.
automatically know all these languages and all this kind of stuff? So that in itself, I mean, it's just one of those things you nitpick because back then, not a lot of people would pay attention to that
Yeah.
because because it's all about just the movie and the story. It's not about the little details of that kind of aspect. So.
I agree totally. So I guess, are we at the point of
Mhm.
giving our ravens and black cats?
I believe we are.
Would you like to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
I will have to say that this one I'm only going to give three Raven calls.
Okay.
I mean, because you know, just having Karloff and Lugosi is spot on. So that's pretty much why I got the three
Mm-hmm.
and the music.
Yeah.
So, but I'm gonna have to go with five black cat hisses.
Oh, woo-hoo. That's just one away from horrible.
Exactly. I just the lack of the dialogue and just the storyline itself are so lacking to me
Mhm.
that it hurts that they put Edgar Allan Poe's name on it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't, even though I may not like Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Black Cat, because I'm very much a cat person and I don't like the abuse of the cat
Hmm.
in the story. But I really, really, really don't like that they attached Edgar to this.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, no, this was just strictly done for the money-making political aspect of the time. There wasn't dialogue enough there, even with some, major characters like Karloff and Lugosi.
Hmm.
It it still it still hurt. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, will I ever watch this again? No.
Yeah.
I mean, I made it through the first time all the way, but part of me was like, I really, really could have done without watching this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And
I
I
have to
remember
say.
first time I ever watched it, it had Poe's name on it. And,
Mhm,
I was like, I'm gonna watch this. And I was like, wow, this really
mhm,
is not Poe at all. Thinking of the Black Cat story itself.
mhm.
And so, yeah, it's not one that I go back to favorably to rewatch, because the only other time I've seen this was the original time I watched it because Poe's name was on it, and then rewatched it for our discussion.
Yeah, it's like one of those things to where you want people to buy your work, to see your work, so you appeal to what you know that they're going to be attracted to. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it's once you get them, reeled in, you
Mhm.
you like fail miserably
Yeah.
about,
I,
providing what needs to be.
absolutely. And okay, so I guess it's my turn. So I'm
Mhm.
going to agree with you on Three Ravens, because I definitely think that, like I said at the very beginning, the music was the best part of this, besides having the star power of Karloff and Lugosi. I love both of those actors dearly, and loved almost everything they've been in that I have seen, because I haven't seen every single picture they've been in. But it just, again, the storyline played out again with some things that were very surprising. You think it's going to go one way, it goes another, which I like the twists, and so I can give it that. But then I'm going to do Four Black Cats, because kind of the same thing with you, Jeanie. It's got Poe's name on it, and there is a black cat, but the black cat doesn't do what he does in Poe's story. And I think they could have totally tied that in to give a little bit more of Poe rather than Poe in name only.
Mhm. Yeah,
That,
they
um,
failed in a lot of aspects to the storyline,
yeah,
my opinion, which is why I gave it the five black cat hisses.
yeah, absolutely. And so it'll be interesting to see if we ever give six. I don't know if
Well,
I think if we give six black cats on something, the Ravens are going to have to be either zero or one.
oh yeah,
It'll
it'll
be
be
an
bad.
attempted murder.
Exactly. Yeah, it'll be seven crows instead of the ravens.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but one other thing, and we'll have to do some research on this. Has there been an actual movie adaptation of Poe's actual story, The Black Cat? And I
Not
cannot
knowledge.
think of one.
No, just in name only, as far as I know.
Yeah. And I think when I was looking up like Poe movies a couple years ago, it seems like there may be another version or so of it called
Yeah.
Black Cat. Again, I have not watched them. This is the only one with the Black Cat that I've seen. It would just be interesting, because the nature of Poe's story is so dark, and with animal abuse and things like that, it, you kind of wonder how many people would want to tackle that,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot
Not
of
saying you
people
can't.
want to watch that. Now, there is a 1941 version of the
Okay.
Black Cat.
Well, I guess we'll be getting there soon.
Yeah, this one has Basil Rathbone in it.
Okay.
And this one actually talks more about cats in general.
Okay. Well,
So,
we'll be visiting that one within the next,
mhm.
I don't know if we'll make it there this season or maybe it'll be season 5.
Might be, but yeah, so far I think that's the only one I'm finding.
Okay. It's just an interesting thought, to think about, how many people have.
Nope, I was wrong. There's one coming out in 2022
Oh,
that it's
well,
a short, but it's only like 6 minutes, but it's called the Black Recat because it's not English.
oh, okay. Well, and that would have been 2 years ago if it was 2022.
Yeah, that's what
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
that's the only ones. Now it looks like there's more Pit and Pendulum, Murders in the Rue Morgue, Mask of the Red Death
Hmm.
that have been redone
Okay.
than there's been anything else.
That kind of makes sense. Yeah.
And of course, House of Usher, um, they kind of all tie in,
Okay.
as, things that have been done in Poe's name type of thing.
Gotcha. Okay. It'll be interesting to see when we get there.
Yep.
Oh,
So I think that's pretty much the end of this episode.
think so. And I enjoyed talking about this one. And even though this was not one of our favorites,
Hmm.
it's always good to have our discussions on these.
Yeah, and I mean it's good to find out, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing the review morgue is to see two different dramatic opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. And our audience, our viewers, our listeners, let us know what you think. If you watch the film and if you agree, you disagree, just like
Hmm.
I always tell my students, you don't always have to agree with me. Have your own opinion when we read things. It's good to analyze.
That's the whole point of having literature and movies and the types of media that we do is because everybody's going to have their own interpretation and their own ideas, whether they like it or dislike it.
That's right. And it's great to think, to just makes you think.
Yep, makes you have discussions and makes you think. That's the whole point of it all.
Absolutely. Well,
All right,
I have enjoyed talking about this,
me
and
too.
I
We are.
we are
Ho.
out.